The house felt painfully quiet after the funeral. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant tick of the old grandfather clock, echoed like a memory I wasn't ready to face. I sat alone at the dining table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. I wasn't drinking, staring blankly at the chair that used to be his Dot, my Thomas Whitmore, my partner for 27 years. Gone just like that. The kind of loss that didn't just take a person, but also the shape of your life. I thought I was ready to grieve, alone. I thought solitude would help me heal. But that night, as the wind brushed against the windows and the shadows lengthened across the floor, I felt like I was disappearing into the silence, until there was a knock at the door. A soft, almost hesitant knock. I rose slowly, unsure whether it was the sound or my imagination playing tricks on me. When I opened the door, a gust of cool evening air met me, and so did a face I hadn't seen in a while. Ethan Carter, my son's best friend, stood on the porch, backlit by the porch light, holding a small covered dish and wearing a look I couldn't quite name. He was taller than I remembered, broader too, with a quiet strength in his posture and something new in his eyes. Not the same Ryan Whitmore, who used to devour our snacks and fall asleep in front of the TV. No, this was a man who had lived a little, lost something too, maybe? "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, voice low and sincere. "Thank you," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. He held out the dish. I made a casserole. My mom used to say it helps. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so unexpectedly kind. I stepped aside and gestured for him to come in. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said quietly, stepping into the dim warmth of my home. "But I wanted to." The house seemed to welcome him more than it had welcomed me lately. He placed the dish on the kitchen counter, and we stood there for a moment, surrounded by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ghosts of a life that used to be full. "Are you holding up?" he asked. I looked at him, and for the first time in days I felt seen, not pitted, not managed, just seen. "I'm surviving," I said with a brittle smile, cracked at the edges. Ethan Carter stepped forward slightly, a subtle gesture, not intrusive. He didn't touch me, but he stood close enough that I felt less alone. "Do you want company?" he asked gently. Just for a little while, my eyes welled up before I could answer. "Yes," I said, surprising even myself. "Please." We settled in the living room. I curled into the corner of the couch, blanket across my lap. Ethan Carter took the opposite side, perching on the edge like he wasn't sure how long he'd stay. It should have felt awkward, but it didn't. It felt natural, comforting. For a while we didn't talk, and in that silence something settled. A strange kind of peace, like a fragile truce between grief and comfort. Then, slowly, we started to speak. He told me about college, about the long nights and the people he missed back home. He shared stories about his new job in a different city, the adjustments, the loneliness. And I found myself telling him things I hadn't told anyone. About my Thomas Whitmore's final months. The helplessness, the anger, the strange relief that came with the end of his suffering, and the guilt that followed. Ethan Carter didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix anything. He just listened, and that meant more than any condolence card ever could. At one point, I reached for a tissue, and my hand brushed his. It was a simple, accidental touch, but I felt something then. Not romantic, not inappropriate, just human. Warmth in a house that had gone cold. "You're allowed to feel everything," he said. "Grief doesn't come with rules." His words caught me off guard. I looked at him, really looked, and in his eyes I saw something beyond kindness. I saw empathy. Recognition, perhaps even his own need to connect. We didn't speak of my son. Not yet. It was too complicated. It's too fragile. Instead, we stayed there talking about memories, about quiet things. At some point, Ethan Carter rose to check the casserole. He brought back 2 plates and insisted I eat a little. And I did. For the first time in days, I ate. Later, when the plates were cleared and the clock had crept past midnight, he turned to me and said, I can go if you need rest. But I didn't want him to go. I didn't want to be alone again with the quiet. Would you stay a little longer? I asked, voice soft, almost ashamed of my need. His smile was understanding, of course. So we sat in silence once more. Not because we had nothing to say, but because not everything needed to be said. Sometimes presence was enough. When he finally stood to leave, he turned back at the door. I'll check in on you tomorrow, he said. I nodded, suddenly terrified that I wouldn't see him again. Thank you for coming tonight, I managed. Glad I did, he replied. And then he was gone. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel as empty. I stood there for a while, staring at the door. One hand resting lightly on the place where his had brushed mine. That night, for the first time since the funeral, I slept. Not deeply, not dreamlessly, but enough. And in the quiet dark, one small truth began to take root inside me. Maybe grief didn't have to be something I endured alone. Maybe healing could begin with something as simple as a knock on the door. Ethan Carter came back the next evening, just like he said he would. There was no big announcement, no dramatic entrance. Just the soft sound of his car pulling into the driveway and a gentle knock on the door that stirred something inside me. Something I had tried to quiet for days. I opened the door to find him, holding 2 mugs of coffee and a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon. I figured you might not have eaten, he said with a half smile. Again? I smiled in spite of myself. You figured right? We didn't talk much at first. We just sat on the couch, sipping lukewarm coffee and splitting the pastries in the bag. The room was lit only by a floor lamp and the soft glow of the fireplace I'd finally learned how to use again. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was comforting. Like the quiet that exists between 2 people who understand that. Words aren't always necessary. But even in that comfort, I felt the tension building. Not bad tension, not dangerous, just a presence, a gravity pulling us slowly closer. As we finished our coffee, Ethan Carter leaned back, stretching his long legs in front of him. You used to bake those cinnamon things, he said. Remember? I nodded. Before everything changed, there was a long pause before he spoke again. You were always warm to me. This house, it felt safe. I swallowed hard. Stop feeling that way for me? Ethan Carter turned his head toward me. His expression soft. Maybe it can again. We didn't move. We didn't touch. But something in the air shifted. Like we had acknowledged the elephant in the room. Not a romantic tension, not lust, but something gentler, something aching. The kind of emotional closeness you don't plan. It's the kind that just grows in the cracks where pain has lived too long. I don't know what I'm doing, I confessed. Most days I just wake up and try not to fall apart. I know, he said. I felt that too. In my own way, I turned to face him, curious. You. My dad left when I was 10. Ethan Carter said, eyes fixed on the fire. Just disappeared. My mom worked 3 jobs and barely had time to see me. Your house, your family. 'Twas my escape. I was stunned by how much I hadn't known. It's Ryan Whitmore. This man who'd grown up alongside my son had carried his own grief all along. You were like a second mom, he added quietly. But lately, I don't know. You feel more real to me now than ever. His words hung in the air like steam rising off a cup. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to feel. But I knew this. I wasn't the only one hurting. I'm scared, I admitted. Scared to feel again. Scared to lose again. Ethan Carter didn't flinch. Me too. His honesty cracked something open inside me. Maybe it was the grief. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was just the sound of someone saying the exact thing I'd been too afraid to name. But I reached for his hand. Slowly, without thought. Without plan, just instinct. He didn't pull away. He let me hold it. Our fingers tangled gently, palms meeting in the space between us. There was no kiss, no declaration, just presence, just warmth. The kind of connection that doesn't need labels. He squeezed my hand once, then let it go. We sat there for a while. Longer, neither of us sure how to proceed. Eventually, Ethan Carter stood. I should let you rest. But his tone held something else. A question unspoken. I walked him to the door. When I opened it, the wind was colder than it had been earlier. He turned to face me on the threshold. Do you want me to come back tomorrow? I hesitated only a moment. Yes, please. He nodded, smiled gently, and walked into the night. I closed the door behind him, pressing my forehead against the wood. Something had begun. Not a romance. Not yet, but something fragile and rare. Something I wasn't ready to name. But I knew this. For the first time in months, I wasn't sinking. I was floating, just a little, and that was enough. I woke up the next morning still wrapped in the memory of last night's silence. The warmth of Ethan Carter's hand in mine lingered longer than it should have, like a whisper echoing in an empty hallway. The house was quiet, but something inside me had shifted. I moved through the morning like I was walking through someone else's life. The kettle whistled. The toast browned. The mail arrived. But I wasn't fully present. My mind kept circling back to the image of Ethan Carter on my couch, the look in his eyes when he said, I felt real. It had been years since anyone had looked at me like that. And yet, now that the sun was up and the weight of daylight settled over me, all I could feel was guilt, confusion, doubt. What would people think? He was my son's best friend, Orion Whitmore, who had practically grown up in my living room. And now I didn't know what we were, what this was. But I also couldn't deny that something had started. Something quiet, unspoken, yet powerful in its own right. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan Carter. I hope you slept okay. Let me know if you want company again tonight. I stared at the screen for a long time. My thumb hovered above the keyboard. I typed, erased, typed again. Eventually, I settled on, thank you. I slept better than I have in weeks. It wasn't a yes, it wasn't a no, but it was honest. Later that day, I drove to the grocery store, the same route I'd driven for years. But everything felt different. People smiled. The cashier made small talk. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was carrying a secret around in plain sight. I wasn't ashamed of Ethan Carter. But I was afraid. Afraid of judgment. Afraid of what my son would say. Afraid that I was mistaking comfort for something deeper, or worse. Afraid that I wasn't. That night, Ethan Carter came by again. He brought soup this time. Said he'd been perfecting the recipe. We ate on the couch again, knees almost touching. I didn't say much and he didn't push. He just talked about his day, about a funny coworker. About how weird it felt to be back home again. Eventually, I broke the silence. This is strange, I said. Ethan Carter looked at me. Strange bad. No. I said quickly, not bad. Just unexpected. He nodded slowly. I know, it's a lot. There was a beat of silence. You don't have to explain anything, he said gently. I'm not here with expectations. I just don't want to make a mistake, I whispered. You're not, he said firmly. But I'm older, I said, my voice cracking. I've lived a whole life. You're just starting yours. And yet, here we are, he replied, his gaze steady. Isn't it okay to just feel what we feel without rushing to define it? That question, that simple question, broke something open in me. I had spent so long trying to fit everything into neat little boxes. Grief, motherhood, WIDOWHOOD. Now connection. But maybe life didn't work like that anymore? Maybe it never did. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. Ethan Carter reached out, placing his hand lightly over mine. Then, let's not try to do anything. Let's just be. His words were like a bomb. No pressure, no labels, just presence. That night, he didn't stay long. We said goodnight with a quiet hug at the door. Nothing more, nothing less. And it was enough. As I closed the door behind him, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not elation, not infatuation. Peace. The days that followed passed like falling leaves. Slow. uncertain and beautiful in there. Fragility, Ethan Carter kept coming by. Never uninvited, never overstaying. He brought groceries, helped fix the leaky faucet, even insisted on raking the backyard when the first chill of autumn settled in. But more than anything, he brought presents. And in his presence, I began to find pieces of myself I thought I'd buried with my Thomas. Whitmore. We didn't talk about what we were, didn't make plans. But we shared coffee in the mornings, laughter in the afternoons, and quiet in the evenings. There was comfort in the rhythm. In the way his hand would graze mine while passing. A cup in the look he gave me when he thought I wasn't watching. Still, the world outside our little bubble kept creeping in. One afternoon, I ran into a friend from church at the market. She asked how I was coping, offered condolences, then gave me a curious look when she spotted Ethan Carter waiting by the car. "That's your son's friend, isn't it?" Her tone wasn't accusatory, but it was edged. I nodded, smiled politely. "Yes, he's been helping out." She gave a slight nod and walked away. Nothing else, no words of judgment. But the silence said plenty. That night I told Ethan Carter. He didn't flinch. He didn't get defensive. Listened. "It's okay," he said, touching my arm. "We don't owe anyone an explanation, but I feel like I owe something to myself," I whispered. He looked at me with that same grounded calm he always carried. "Then let's talk." About all of it. So we did, on the porch under a sky littered with stars, wrapped in blankets and vulnerability. We talked about the age gap, about my son, about the difference between healing and hiding. "I don't want to be a distraction from your life," I said. "You're not," he replied without hesitation. "You're part of it." "I'm scared," I admitted. "Me too," he said, smiling sadly. "But sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stay even when it's easier to walk away." That night, we didn't need promises or declarations. We just needed the truth. The truth was this. In a world full of noise and expectations, what we had was quiet. But it was real. Eventually, I told my son. It wasn't easy. He was confused, hurt, silent for a while, but he came around. Not because he fully understood, but because he trusted me. Because he knew Ethan Carter. And maybe because he saw that I was no longer drowning in grief. Life didn't magically become easier after that. There were awkward moments, lingering glances from neighbors, invitations that stopped arriving. But there were also long walks, shared meals, inside jokes that felt like home. And in all of that, we kept choosing each other. Not out of desperation, not to fill a void, but because somewhere along the way, amid all the loss we had, become something neither of us expected. Something neither of us could walk away from. One evening, as we watched the sun dip behind the trees, Ethan Carter took my hand and said, "This, whatever it is, it's the most honest thing I've ever felt." I squeezed his fingers. "Me too." We didn't need labels. We didn't need forever. We just needed now. And in the quiet moments, that was enough.